John Hayes was a standout employee for SkyWest Airlines for 8 years. Working for an airline was sort of a lifelong dream for John Hayes. He loved all things dealing with aviation. He wanted to be a pilot, but at 6'6", that's a little hard to do. So he did the next best thing and decided to work at an airline. SkyWest thought very, very highly of Mr. Hayes until he developed kidney disease and needed to take medical leave for that kidney disease. In June 2014, Mr. Hayes began medical leave. The very first day he began dialysis, SkyWest canceled his health insurance in violation of its own policy. SkyWest was self-insured at the time, so they realized enormous savings by canceling his insurance. Despite that betrayal, he tried to return to work in August 2014. On Mr. Hayes' third day back, he had a minor medical incident. He became lightheaded. And after SkyWest's Human Resources Department learned about this, they decided on their own, without speaking to Mr. Hayes, without speaking to any of his doctors, that they were just going to put him on involuntary leave. He applied for 6 different positions that he was qualified for. SkyWest rejected him for every single position. Mr. Hayes filed a charge of discrimination with the EEOC, and then he came to me and we filed this lawsuit.
So I got involved with the Hayes case because Paul Maxon had been litigating it very successfully. He had gotten a number of claims past summary judgment and was set to go to trial, and decided that he needed a second chair. And so he brought me in to help out with jury instructions and go to trial.
This trial was like no trial I've been involved with. I always tell my clients when they come in, trial is nothing like TV. People don't break down, they don't admit they're lying. This trial was like TV, it was like a movie.
We had an interesting jury pool. It included a gentleman who had been on the very same form of kidney dialysis as our client, Mr. Hayes, which is a fairly unusual thing. It's a type of dialysis that you undergo at night so that you can work during the day. We were sure that SkyWest would strike him, and they got to their 3rd strike and they did not, and we were out of strikes. So he was on our jury, and I have to assume that probably worked out well for us in the end.
SkyWest wasn't prepared. They didn't have good explanations for all the discriminatory actions they took, and they turned really desperate during a key question of one of SkyWest's representatives regarding why they didn't put Mr. Hayes in this recruiter position that he was qualified for. And SkyWest's paralegal, who was sitting just 10 feet in front of the judge, turned to the witness and mouthed, "Don't answer." The judge was the only person who saw this, and he immediately stopped the proceedings and kicked the paralegal out of trial. It didn't take the jury long to reach a decision, and in the end they found in favor of Mr. Hayes on all 4 claims that he had brought, and found that SkyWest was liable for $2.45 million in damages. Safety was a really big issue in this case. When we're trying to use David Ball's strategies as employment attorneys, sometimes we have trouble explaining how employment discrimination actually poses a danger. But this was an airline, and as part of its discrimination against Mr. Hayes, SkyWest had passed him over for a safety supervisor position. They placed somebody in the safety supervisor position who had been issued a citation for bringing a knife to an airport, and who had been issued a write-up by SkyWest for damaging an aircraft in a way that could have caused a crash. And that's the problem with employment discrimination. When you discriminate against people because of their disabilities, when you discriminate against people for any reason, then you are passing over more qualified people in favor of less qualified people. This could have been a real danger for the public, and I think that's one of the real reasons the jury was so outraged about this. And cases like this are really important because they send a message to employers that there's a cost for disability discrimination, and that they can't just get away with shedding from their workforce people that they see as undesirable or too expensive or not worth the trouble.